Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel and welcome back to another Sims 4 speedrunning video, or welcome to the channel if you're new here. So in today's video I'm going to be building the world of StrangerVille, which is the world that we got from the game pack The Sims 4 StrangerVille, and I'm going to be building a Southern Victorian family home. So this house ends up having 3 proper bedrooms and 3.5 proper bathrooms, and it's built on a 40 by 30 lot. Now I'm doing quotation marks, which I know you can't see, but I'm saying proper because this house, it may or may not have some secret, hidden, deep underground areas that also have some living quarters. But this week, for starters, my computer finally works again. That was a whole thing. I'll talk about that shortly. But then secondly, I also sat down and did something which has been on my to-do list literally ever since the Horse Ranch expansion pack came out. And that is build something in the world of StrangerVille with stables. Because to me, the world of StrangerVille is one of them worlds that horses kind of seamlessly blend in with. Like, we've got some paintings from the StrangerVille DLC that, I'm not joking, have got horses on them. We've got the painting before we got the actual horse. And so for the longest time, I've been meaning to sit down and just build something in this world that could have horses. And I'm so happy with this build and the way it came together and the way it turned out. And also the storyline that I've got to go along with this build. I just hope you've got a cup of tea, because I'm not joking when I say to you, I've got a 2,400 word document on Google Documents that is just notes on the Sims that I imagine living in this household. And so it's safe to say it's probably one of my most in-depth storylines ever, and I'm so obsessed with it. I just love it so much. And so yeah, I really hope you like it as well. But anyway, getting on from that and talking a little bit more about the build itself and also what I'm doing right now. So as you can see, I've pretty much already built the whole main structure of the build. I've already done the roofing, the roof trim, and currently I'm coming in and doing some wallpapering. Now, something that I wanted to mention for this build, for starters, I was looking at a picture. I'll find the picture for you and I'll pop it up on the screen so you can have a little look. But then secondly, I decided to experiment with different roof trims in the game, which might sound silly, but maybe I'm just boring. Normally, whenever it comes around to putting a roof trim on a roof, I just use the box standard one. I just use the plain, basic, just white roof trim. But for this build, I wanted to build something that felt very Southern, very Victorian. And with some of the newer expansion packs in the game, we've had some more roof trims implemented, and I've been meaning to use them in a build. And I just felt like, for a Southern house, it kind of works, especially for a Victorian house as well. And so you might notice in some small areas, I just decided to experiment with some roof trim. It looks very dainty, but it feels really cutesy, and I just really like it. But you can see currently I'm just coming in and placing down some windows onto this build. Now, going back to the picture that I found on Pinterest, which, by the way, beautiful picture. I think it's meant to be a painting. I'm not sure who painted it, but it's absolutely beautiful. And I knew that I wanted to recreate and put it in the game, but I was a little bit worried and I was a little bit scared, because if you actually look at it, the whole entire painting of the house is just white. And beautiful, but in The Sims 4, a bit hard, because sometimes when you zoom out and something's all white, it doesn't even look like you painted it. It doesn't even look like you put any wallpaper on it. And so when it came round to figuring out what windows and doors I was going to use, I decided to use some that we got from both Discover University and then also Base Game, that kind of have some like black lining on the inside of them, if you know what I mean. I did also use a few that we got from just the base game that have some black shutters, but I feel like when you zoom out, it does actually look like you've done something to the house and you have actually put some effort into it, because I feel like that is the problem with having wall white houses in the game. It just feels like when you zoom out, it doesn't even look like you've applied any sort of wallpaper. And so where I decided to place down some black and white windows, I thought I need like a little bit of colour. I need to like zhuzh it up a little bit. And so you'll see throughout the build, I placed down some flower boxes onto the windows, and they've got these little red flowers, and it looks so pretty. But you can see now I'm coming in and I'm doing the floor plan. This floor plan, I had such a... this is the thing. I struggle with building Victorian houses. And if you've been watching me for maybe a few years at this point, you've probably heard me talk about how much I struggle when it comes around to doing Victorian houses, because one thing is the exterior, but then secondly, the interior, the floor plan. There's so many bump outs and so many different like bits and bobs, and it's such a faff to figure out the floor plan. But the way it came together in the end, I am really happy with it. And you can see now that I'm coming in and making a little bit of a basement. Now, I will say the basement does kind of change in the shape and the size of it, because currently there is only one basement level, but in the end in this house there ends up being 2 basements. We've got like the first initial basement, which ends up having some nectar making things for one of the Sims that lives in this household. There is also a little bar area down there. There's like the decoration box from Season, an art easel, like random stuff, random like gameplay stuff. But then there is a little door, and you go down that door, and there's a ladder, and you go down that ladder, and there is basically a secret bunker. Now the bunker kind of doubles up to be almost like a safe room for the household that are going to be living in this house my so far. In there it's got 2 bunk beds, so 4 Sims can sleep in there. It's enough for all the different household members. We've also got a tiny little makeshift bathroom. It's not a proper bathroom. It's got a shower and bath combo, but the shower head is like a hose pipe. So it looks like, they've just gone outside, pinched the hose pipe from the garden and put it downstairs into some sort of like iron tub. We've also got a tiny little iron toilet. And then also in the little safe room area, we have a tiny kitchenette. It hasn't got an oven, but it's got a kettle, which sounds silly. But when I was building it, I was thinking, well, if ever I was in an apocalypse myself, I couldn't unplug my oven and bring it with me, but I could unplug my kettle and bring it with me. And so I placed down a kettle, but then looking back on it and thinking about it, there's a fridge down there. So they've got a fridge, but they have no oven. But I placed down some little like shelving units onto the wall, and I placed down what I was thinking could be like dried up food, or maybe cereal boxes, cans of soup. And so maybe they use the kettle and they heat up the little dried food in the packets. But also in that room as well, I ended up placing down like a little radio, and then also I think a listening device. But as well as that, in this house it ends up being a home office, which sounds really boring in comparison to like a little secret bunker situation, but there is a home office. And then there also ends up being a laundry room, and then I think that's pretty much it, other than the horses stables, which you can see that I'm now moving over and starting to build. Now maybe it's just me, but I really struggle building horses stables because I've never had horses. I'm not a horse girly, never have been. I'm a dog girly through and through. Never, you can be a horse girl and a dog girl, but I've never had horses. I've never gone to horses stables. So when it comes round to building them in the game, I've pretty much got like 3 different types of styles that I know how to build a ranch in, or like a horses stables in. They're my default. That's what I go towards, and it doesn't really fit in with the world of StrangerVille. But then I was trying to look up on Pinterest pictures of Victorian but then Southern stables. Don't really exist on my Pinterest feed anyway. And so I kind of built a stables that does look like it belongs in the world of Brinton Bay, but I mean, it does the job. Your Sims can have 2 horses in there, and then if they want to, there is also a little training area outside, because where I'm building in the world of StrangerVille, but I knew I wanted to have horses, I felt like it was only essential to make sure that the horses actually had something to do, because in the world of Chestnut Ridge that we got from the Horse Ranch DLC, there is stuff in the neighbourhood that your Sims can interact with and train your horses, but where we're in a completely different world, there ain't any of that. And so I knew when it came round to doing this build, it was, essential to include it. And so I placed down some horses jumps. But anyway, moving on from that and getting on and talking about the Sims that are going to be living in this house, my safe hole. Now, I'm not joking when I say to you that I've got a 2,400 Google Docs sheet. It's 2,436 words, and this is just quick notes. This is just things that I jotted down that I wanted to make sure that I included when I told you about their backstory, because their backstory it's so different, and it just fits in so perfectly as well with the world of StrangerVille and why this family have a horse ranch. And there is so many little tiny details about it, and I'm obsessed with it. But the household consists of 4 Sims. We have a set of parents, a teenage boy, and then a kid that's a little girl. Now, from the outside, if Sims were to live in like Willow Creek or Brinton Bay or, Windenburg, this family probably looks like somewhat of a perfect family, but I mean, a bit of a spoiler, they're not. Now, I'm going to kind of tell you the story of the Sims that are going to be living in this house from the way that I thought it, basically, because the idea that I had for this build, I started off with the idea, and then I configured all different parts of the storyline, and then once I had that idea, I then came in and did the build. So you're going to see some things throughout the decoration process of this build that kind of reference the storyline. I did it on purpose because I wanted it to fit in and I wanted it to make perfect sense. But starting off with the storyline for the mum. Now, the mum is originally from the world of Chestnut Ridge, which that is the world that we got from the Horse Ranch EP. And I imagine that she spent her whole entire life growing up there. She spent her childhood there. She grew up with brothers and sisters. And I imagine that that her family are just from a horse-loving family. They love horses. It makes sense. It's the world that we got from the horse ranch GP. And so I imagine that her family are record-breaking horse riders, and she is exactly the same. Now, where I'm building this house, my save file, a big portion of my save is almost focusing on relationships that happen outside of the immediate household, because I hate it when you go into like Widow Creek and you've got all these Sims and it's literally just them, and like they haven't got any distant relatives, or they haven't got any cousins, or they ain't got any aunts or uncles or anything. And so I was trying to think, how could I work this idea for this sim into my storyline for my save file? And so I was thinking, well, there is a sim in the world of Chestnut Ridge who is called Don Gooseman. He's a townie that comes with the game, and he's meant to be some retired horse champion. He lives in a little house and he's got a little horse, and I was thinking, well, what about if I make it so he is the granddad of the children of his household, or the mum's dad. Now, I might be wrong here, forgive me if I am, but I believe when you enter a brand new save file, he's not meant to have any deceased spouses, which sounds really strange, but basically I was thinking, well, I want to include him in my save, like he's part of his storyline now, but when you go into a brand new save file, by default, he just lives alone with his horse, and so I still want to include him in my save, and I will be eventually making him a little house for him and his horse. But I was thinking, well, maybe they had a big family, maybe the mum of this household was one of like, I don't know, 6 or 7, and over time the other members just like grew up. Our brothers and sisters live in different areas and they live in different worlds and stuff, or maybe they still live in the same world but they just don't live at home anymore, and where his wife passed away, maybe he decided to downsize. But yeah, I will be eventually making him a little house my save file. But for the mum, now I imagine when she was in her 20s, she wanted to follow in her dad's footsteps, because her dad, Don, if you're not aware, he's meant to be like this legendary sim that's taught all these different sims horse riding skills. He's meant to be all like pally with all the people in Chestnut Ridge. Like, he is meant to be the ultimate horse champion. I can't lie to you, I've never actually played with Don myself. The only time I've seen him, and the only reason why I've actually noticed him before, is because recently I had my sim visit a restaurant that I've got in the world of Sulani. I just plopped it down the gallery, but he was the waiter there, and I noticed his moustache, because he's got a proper moustache. I'll pop a little picture of him on the screen. I never knew he was actually a townie that came with the world of Chestnut Ridge, but yeah, he's meant to be some legendary horse champion. He's meant to have taught some other members of the world of Chestnut Ridge. And so, to me, makes perfect sense with this storyline idea, because his daughter, naturally, would also be good at horse riding. But the way that I thought about the storyline, and the way that I kind of like drafted it down in my Google Docs, is almost written out kind of the way a film would play out. Does make sense. I was a film student for an embarrassing amount of years. I don't know how many years I studied film, but I kind of wrote it out to be a bit of like a film storyline. So you've got the different years, we're going to go throughout the different years. But I imagine that the mum, when she was in her 20s, she was the kind of girl that could walk into a room and just everyone would just turn around and stare at her. Like, I imagine that she is just so beautiful, and she just has this kind of like aura that comes off her. And I imagine that on top of it, she's also just a really nice person. Now, I imagine in the world of Chestnut Ridge, all the boys, by the way, if you just notice I put a fridge, but sorry, I'm interrupting myself here, but if you just notice I placed down a fridge on the driveway next to that truck, I was using the fridge for a unit of measurement, because I wanted to make sure your Sims could get around that truck that I placed down onto the little driveway area. And me, whenever I build, sometimes I use a fridge, because a fridge is a great just size proportionate thing. But yeah, if you just notice that fridge, it was just so I could see the measurements. But I imagine that this mum, she had all these different boys running after her. I imagine that she used to get so many love letters sent for her mailbox. Like, I just imagine that everyone growing up wanted to almost date this mum, because she was beautiful, she was kind, she was just all round a lovely person, and she also had an ambition, and she came from a very influential family in the horse riding world, and so naturally a lot of people would just be almost drawn to her. Now, even though I imagine she had a lot of people almost like throwing themselves at her, I think that she didn't care. Like, she didn't care. She was so focused on horse riding. She was just so focused on being the best at what she does, and she didn't care about any of this until one day she walked into a bar in the world of Chestnut Ridge, and there was this quite handsome young guy, and he was wearing a military uniform. This person she has never seen before, and he definitely wasn't from the world of Chestnut Ridge. I imagine that in Chestnut Ridge, everyone knows everyone, and she's never seen him before, and so when she walked in and she saw this like brand new guy, she was a little bit startled. Now, I imagine that they got chatting. I don't know how they started talking. I know I can go in depth, but I don't know how they started a conversation up. But maybe a water or a drink or something. But I imagine after a few hours, they got chatting, and it was the first person that she felt some sort of genuine connection with, because I imagine that this sim bonded with this military person in this uniform over almost like having a bit of weight on their shoulders, because they both come from very influential families. Now, I imagine that this young guy wasn't from Chestnut Ridge, but he was from the neighbouring town of StrangerVille, which is where I'm building. And to me, in my head, StrangerVille, Chestnut Ridge, they look somewhat similar demographically, because in Chestnut Ridge, you've got a bit of like oasis-y kind of, you know, ready rock, and in the world of StrangerVille, you've got a bit of oasis-y ready rock. Like, to me, they look like Brinton Bay and Henfield and Bagley. Like, they look like they could be somewhat neighbouring, or at least in the same area of the world, if you get what I mean. Well, I mean, I say this, I have actually got written down in my notes that StrangerVille is quite far. It's not exactly, you know, just pop the shops in StrangerVille if you're from Chestnut Ridge kind of distance. So I imagine it to be a few hours, maybe a few different states away. But I did also just do a quick Google search, and apparently Chestnut Ridge and StrangerVille are both based off Nevada, which I always get a little bit wary to say because I feel like I always say that wrong, but they're both based off the state of Nevada and Arizona in the US, so it makes sense. But either way, I was thinking, when the mum of this household met this man, he was in the military career and he just so happened to be stationed in the world of Chestnut Ridge for a number of months. Now, in that time, when she wasn't horse riding and when he wasn't doing all his military bits and bobs, I don't know what they do, but when he wasn't doing his job, they would spend a lot of time together until one day things changed and he was told that he had to move back to the world of StrangerVille. Quickly before I move over and start telling you about this young man's backstory, I want you to notice these little planters, because they're going to come into storyline in a second, but you see these planters in the back garden. Just note them down in your red. But anyway, moving on to the storyline for this young, handsome man in the army uniform. Now, he's also from a very influential family, like the mum of his household, but completely different backgrounds. You know, the mum of his household, she's Don's daughter. She comes from a horse riding background, you know, all jumps and barrels and that kind of stuff, whereas he's from a military background. Now, in my head, this military background is a proper military family. Like, I was thinking, this guy, his granddad was in the military, his dad was in the military, his granddad's dad was in the military, like proper generations before him. They've all been in the same career path. They've all done excellent things for the military. Maybe they're not the nicest type of people, but they have done some good work for the military service. I was thinking to the extent of, there's probably somewhere in a random park in the world of StrangerVille, there is a statue of this guy's granddad. And I imagine that in the world of StrangerVille, maybe a few bars are named after this guy's dad. And so, naturally, growing up, he knew that he'll be following in almost like the same footsteps, whether he liked it or not, and whether he had a choice in the matter, almost like he couldn't even choose for himself. This is the kind of like idea that I imagine that this guy is from. But I was thinking that before he met this young lady in the bar, he was kind of known around the world of StrangerVille as being a bit of a Don Lothario, if you get what I mean. I always refer to Sims that like to go on a lot of dates and woohoo other Sims as a bit of a Don Lothario, because if you're not aware who Don Lothario is, he's a Sim that we've got from the Sims 4 base game, but he was also in other versions of the Sims. He was like in the Sims 3 and the Sims 2 and stuff, but he is basically someone that just sleeps with a lot of Sims, to be quietly honest with you. And so whenever I refer to someone as someone that does them kind of activities, I always call him a bit of a Don Lothario. But yeah, I imagine that this guy, massive heartbreaker, and he was almost known to have a few different Sims on the go, but it all kind of changed when he met this one young lady at a bar. She was lovely, she was beautiful, and she also had no idea about this Sims family and almost like the legacy behind him, which I imagine a lot of the people that he dated probably dated him or kind of gave him the time of day because of his family and almost because of his generational wealth. So kind of jumping forward in time, but we're still very much in the backstory. We're now at the point where these two, they've met at the bar, they've had a lovely chit chat, they've spoke about the weight on their shoulders from both their families for very different scenarios, but you know, they've had a lovely chit chat, and it's got to the point where over the last couple of months they spent every second that they had spare with each other. You know, when he wasn't doing all his military stuff and when she weren't jumping on a horse. Like, they would spend a lot of time together, but eventually he changed his job position, or he got stationed to move back home to the world of StrangerVille. Now, they stayed in contact, and I liked the idea of them writing each other love letters, because I'm imagining this scenario back in the day. You know, this is before Facebook, this is before Twitter, this is before you could email someone. So to me, love letters, and it's also a little bit more romantic, but I imagine that once he moved back home, he could kind of get back to doing what he was doing before he went to the world of Chestnut Ridge, whereas she was just so obsessed with this idea of him. Note that, idea of him, yeah. But I imagine that she was so obsessed with this idea of him, and just so obsessed with this person, that she met at this bar that she could bond with all these different scenarios. And so eventually, one day, she wrote to him saying how sad she was about it. And so he wrote back to her and said, why don't she come and live with him in the world of StrangerVille? Now, I imagine the conversation went something along the lines of, they can move into his family home. It had been passed down through the generations, and she could redecorate it however she wanted. She could make some room for her horses. She could have horses living in this house as well. And I imagine that they probably even spoke about one day maybe her opening up some sort of like horse riding school, and she could teach some of the residents in the world of StrangerVille how to ride a horse, because, you know, she's very good at it. I imagine that she's won multiple different awards for it. And so I imagine he did a lot of persuading and quite a lot of convincing, but eventually she decided that she was going to go and be with him. And so she left her family behind. She left Don, her dad. She left her brothers and sisters. Don't know how many there's going to be, but there's going to be quite a few. But I imagine that she left her whole family behind. And yeah, she moved to the world of StrangerVille. I imagine that they probably started off in not this house, and it will come into the reason why shortly. But I imagine that they moved in together in the world of StrangerVille. And yeah, they now, current day, live in the neighbourhood of Shady Acres, which is the neighbourhood that I'm currently building in. But I imagine that before she moved to this world, the young military man, her boyfriend, kind of downplayed how much of a big deal his family was to town. Like I said, statues of Grandad in the park, venues named after his dad. Like, his family is quite a big deal in this world. And he did say about, you know, I've got a lot of weight on my shoulders, got a lot of things to live up to, but kind of downplayed the amount that this family had influence on the world of StrangerVille. Now, because of this massive influence, I was thinking when she arrived, she was probably the talk of the town, not in a good way, but I imagine that she was the talk of the town, and she kind of ignored it. And after a few short months, they got married. They had a massive wedding. I was thinking that probably the majority of this town came to this wedding. It was in the newspapers, it was front page, like, it was all over the press, because this person from this certain generational legacy had finally got married. And so it was a massive thing. And something that I love about this storyline is, unknowingly to this young girl, this Victorian home that I was building was actually part of a will. And the young man that she met in the bar could only move into it and live there if he was to get married and start a family. Which, she didn't know that at the time, but if she did, it might have changed a few things. My voice got notably quiet then. It's only because I'm getting excited talking about this storyline, because, like you can tell, I have thought a lot, and I've thought hard about this storyline and just building this house, and I'm just so excited to talk about it. But yeah, she didn't know before she moved into this house that he promised her, you know, like, oh, you can move into this house, you can decorate however you want, we can build like a little horses stables, you could have like a horse riding school. She didn't know that the only way that he was actually going to move into this house himself is if them two was to get married. But either way, they got married and they moved into this house. She decorated it however she liked. I know I'm very much on the inside now, and I have still got quite a bit of the storyline. I am going to try and talk about things as I place them down at the same time. Don't know how I'm going to do that. Multitasking is not my finest quality, but I tried to go for a bit of a Victorian and then Southern kind of style on the inside of this house. I feel like it's just, I'm obsessed with it. I love it so much. And wait until you see the kitchen. I'm obsessed with the kitchen. But either way, I imagine they moved into this house. She decorated it however she wanted. And they did build some stables for horses. But then when she was planning on, you know, opening up this horse riding school, and she was actually putting her ideas to fruition, one day she had a bit of morning sickness, and then she found out she was actually pregnant. Now, I've made that sound like a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. She always knew that one day that she wanted to have children, but she kind of just expected to have a little bit more time on her hands before she actually did have children. But either way, after a number of months, or in the Sims 4 terms, 3 days, she gave birth to their baby boy. And I imagine at first it was all happy families. You know, her and her husband, they were doing a great job at raising their baby boy together. But as time went on, I imagine that he tried to almost distance himself from her, and he was getting more and more focused on his military career as he kind of like moved up the hierarchy, and eventually she had no time to do anything for the horses. I imagine that she never actually bought a horse. I imagine that they built the horses' stables and then cobwebs, nothing happened. You know, she fell pregnant. What's the point of getting a horse? You know, I'm going to have a baby. And so she probably thought, I'll wait until the little boy is a little bit older and then I'll get a horse. But then as she kind of went throughout the years raising her son, it kind of got put on the back burner. Also, I feel like it's worth noting, I imagine that maybe her husband or the father of this household maybe helped out for 3 months top. Like he was very much there at the very start when it's all like fun and they're all a little bit rubbery, but then as soon as it started to be terrible twos, off is off kind of thing. And so I imagine that she spent a lot of her time just indoors, just raising this baby boy, almost like herself. And I imagine that the idea of horse riding just seems so far away to her. But after a few years, the marriage was kind of on the ropes a little bit, and the mum of this household just spent all of her time caring for this little boy who I imagine at this time was probably getting a little bit old enough to start preschool or kindergarten. I don't know what you call it, but you know, like when you're like 4 and you get sent off to nursery or reception for a few hours. I imagine he was getting to that age where he could go away for a couple of hours in the day, but then she didn't know what to do because she just spent all of her time caring for this little boy. And so she thought, well, why not I try and save my marriage, and why don't we have another baby? And so they welcomed their second child, who is a little girl. Quickly, whilst I am decorating the lounge room, I did want to mention, you see that picture that I placed behind the fireplace? I think for my sofa, I'm actually going to replace that with some actual family photos, and maybe I'll try and take like a massive photo of like granddad who's meant to have a statue in the park, and maybe I'll replace that with a photo of a family member, because I feel like that makes sense for the storyline purposes. And also you'll see shortly, I placed down almost like a row of bookcases in between this little like bump out area, and then you'll see I placed down a number of different horse statues, which I imagine was the mum's when she was younger. Before she met this bloke, they were all of her different trophies that she won from doing all these different horse riding competitions. And yeah, I ended up placing them down onto the little bookcase area. But either way, getting back to the storyline, so they had this second kid, the little girl. Didn't really change much for their marriage. Their marriage was still very much on the ropes, and if anything, kind of made it worse, because I feel like the dad of this household desperately wanted to have a little boy. You know, he grew up kind of following in his dad's footsteps, who followed in his dad's footsteps, who followed in his dad's footsteps, and so he wouldn't really feel like he would have that same connection with a little girl, which is absolute cobblers, and you obviously can, but for the storyline purposes, it makes good for a good storyline. But yeah, I imagine that when they had this little girl, she thought that it would be all happy days again, like how it was when she gave birth to his little boy, but it didn't, and it just got worse. And if anything, she had to stay in the house more because, you know, in between running to preschool and back, she was then caring for an infant, and she always had her hands full, and she never left the house. She was always just kind of housebound, and she just spent her days spoon feeding yogurt into an infant's mouth. And so it's actually really sad. But after a few years, and when I say this, I'm skipping forward maybe like 5-6 years at this point, but after a few years, she then came to the realization that this young person that she met in the bar all that time ago wasn't actually the person that she thought she had met. You know how I said that she was so obsessed and so in love with this idea of a person? I said make note of the idea bit. It's because he basically put on this fake persona of this really lovely gentleman who was in the military, and you know, he came from a family that had some high expectations, but it's all right. But no, there was actually a lot of ghosts in the closet. What's it called? Cobwebs? No, it's not cobwebs. What is it? Skeletons in the closet. Also, by the way, I said ghosts, but I feel like the way that I said it sounded like I said goats in the closet. They might have some goats. They have got a hay bed on this house, so if they wanted to, they could have horses and baby sheep and baby goats. But yeah, I imagine that he kind of gave her this fake persona of this idea, and kind of gave her this idea of this life that she could have. She got it, went downhill. It didn't happen. And so after a few years, she started to see this mean streak in him, and she then eventually found out that secretly he was actually a bit of an artist him. You know, he wasn't exactly as nice as he made out to be. But when I said that when she first moved to town, there was a lot of chit-chats about this Sim and her partner, and she just kind of ignored it, she put it on a bit of a back burner. Now, I imagine that she felt like she never really had a real friend, and shortly after she moved to town is when she fell pregnant, and then she spent her days spoon feeding an infant, and then once he grew up, she then had another infant, and so she kind of went a number of years being so isolated and just feel like she didn't really have any mates. I feel like she would go to the supermarket and she could overhear people talking about her and talking about her relationship, and she just, over time, she just got really sad, which is actually really sad. But I imagine that she just fell out of love with horse riding, she fell out of love with her husband. The only one thing that she actually really liked was her children, but eventually she got speaking to her neighbour. Now, where I'm building in the world of StrangerVille, there is 2 different neighbourhoods, and the neighbourhood that I'm building in, Shady Acres, there is 2 pre-existing families when you open up a brand new save file. There is one family that is basically just like a load of mates, they live together. I've already built them a house. I've built them a house and they actually live with one of their mates' mums, because in this economy, for them to be able to afford a Victorian like that, it doesn't make not any sense to me. And so I built them a house already. That's for the eclectic household. But there is another household that live in this neighbourhood, and it is called the Roswell family. Now, the Roswell family consists of 2 members. There is a husband and a wife. The husband is called Ted, and the wife is called Meredith. And supposedly, Ted is meant to be the mayor of StrangerVille. Now, where Meredith is the wife of the town's mayor, I imagine that she is quite knowledgeable of this woman's husband and the family he comes from and the generations before him. She is kind of in the know situation. But I imagine that where they are neighbours, after a while, maybe Meredith decided to, reach out what's it called? Olive branch? When you want to be friends? Kind of situation. But I imagine that maybe she saw her one day in the garden and just had a chit chat, or maybe she saw her one day in the supermarket, and maybe it's when the wife of this household overheard other people talking about her. Maybe Meredith went over and just tried to comfort her in a way or something. But I imagine when they started their conversation, it was probably something along the lines of, we've been neighbours for X amount of years and I've barely said 10 words to you kind of situation. But I imagine that after a while, they actually became quite close. And I imagine where they're neighbours, Meredith would come over for tea and, like little picky bits, and maybe even sometimes they come over and they share a bottle of nectar. There does end up being a nectar making station in the basement, and so maybe that's something they like to do together. Maybe they like to make wine in their free time or something. But I imagine that after some time, Meredith actually sat her down and told the mum of his household about the legacy that this Victorian home, and how in order her husband was able to live here, and the fact is she had to get married to him so he could live here himself. Also, quickly, sorry, interrupting myself, I'm so obsessed the way this kitchen ends up turning out. I did this thing using this Lovestruck. It's meant to be a wall decoration. I believe it's meant to go on the exterior of a house. It's meant to be some sort of like roof thing, but I tried to merge it in to these kitchen cabinets. The one that I've used is from the Sims 4 Vampires game pack, and I'm so obsessed with it. I just feel like it feels so southern but then still quite Victorian at the same point. But either way, getting back to this little backstory, but yeah, I imagine that eventually Meredith kind of broke the news to her that her husband is, I was about to say, quite a mean and nasty Sim, but to be honest, by this point I imagine that she probably could have told her that herself. But I imagine that Meredith is the one that kind of broke the news to her and told her about this legacy that this family has, and especially a massive part of this family's will is that you can move into this house and you can live in this massive Victorian home, but you've got to, it's going to sound really weird here, but carry on the bloodline. You've got to continue with the family, and you've got to make sure that there's going to be generations after you kind of situation. But yeah, Meredith almost broke the news to her, but I doubt that she was shocked, because over the years, her and her husband had kind of become more and more distant, and as he was going up the hierarchy of being in the military career and he was getting more and more responsibilities, he was probably never at home. I was about to say I imagine that, but I have noticed that I'm saying that I imagine that a lot. But this is also, I was conjuring up this idea in my head. My fingers were tippy-tapping when I was on my keyboard thinking about this storyline, and so all of this is very much in my head, and so I'm really sorry I keep saying I imagine that. But yeah, after a few years, he was going away a lot for work, she was always at home looking after the kids, and she realised that he actually had hidden mean trait in him, and it wasn't the first guy that she saw all them years ago in the bar, but she didn't want to leave him because her husband's family, they are so influential, and she knew that if she wanted a divorce, she could leave StrangerVille, and she would probably be made to leave the world of StrangerVille. But unfortunately, with her family's legacy or her husband's family legacy, she unfortunately would have to leave her kids behind. And so she has decided to stick it out for the minute. So now jumping back to the current day and how I imagine that the household are living now, the baby boy that was born that lives in this house has now grown up to be a teenager, and unfortunately from quite a young age he actually showed signs that he was in fact his father's son. I imagine that this little boy grew up and loved the idea of just joining this family legacy and joining the military, and he idolizes his dad, and whenever his dad is at home he's just so obsessed with his dad. In his bedroom, you'll notice, but I placed down some of the military awards that your Sims can actually gain if they're in the military career, but I rotated them using the tool mod, and I made it look like they're in some sort of frame prints. I imagine that they're maybe like his prized possession, but yeah, I imagine that this teenager is maybe a little bit of a nasty sim as well. I imagine he's got a bit of a mean streak in him, and I was thinking that he's probably not the friendliest person to interact with, probably hasn't got the best intentions. And so as well, in his bedroom you might notice that I placed down a poster that has the planet, and it has some sort of like death symbol. It's not giving the friendliest energy, but you'll see that shortly. But for the daughter, the little girl that was kind of born to save this household's marriage, if you want to put it that way, but the daughter has now grown up. She is a little girl, she's a kid, and thankfully she is her mother's child. Like, she is the nicest sim ever. Now, I was thinking that growing up, her mum told her all of these stories about her horse riding days, and this little girl was just so fascinated by horses and her mum's medals and all the trophies that she's got in like the living room and stuff. You know, the Growing Together expansion pack, and we've got different family dynamics. The mum of the household is going to be very close. You can't make it very close, but you can make it close with certain family members. I'm going to make it so the mum of the household is going to have a close sentiment towards her daughter, a distant or potentially difficult with her son, and then whatever the worst one is for her husband. But yeah, her daughter is just so obsessed with horses, and her mum used to maybe tell her like bedtime stories of her when she was younger, and she was just so obsessed with this idea of horses. And so one day the mum decided to gift her a horse to ride herself, whether it be for a Winterfest gift or maybe it was her birthday. But her mum gifted her a horse, and slowly but surely the mum herself also kind of got back into horse riding, and with that kind of fell back in love with it again. I like the idea as well of maybe the mum bought maybe like a mum horse. I don't know. I'm going to say it. I don't know horse terminology, but I like the idea of maybe the mum buying the daughter a horse, or maybe a horse that is a baby and then also got the mum as well. So maybe there's like a mummy horse and a baby horse, and then the mum and the daughter shared the horses. Does that make sense? But I like that idea. I thought that would be really sweet. But yeah, the mum eventually started to get back into horse riding thanks to her daughter. But in terms of current day of where the husband stands, I was thinking that he would be quite high up in the military career, maybe level 9, whatever that is. I don't know it off the top of my head, but you know, there's 10 levels to most careers in the game. Maybe he is level 9. He's just about to almost get what he's always dreamed of, get what his dad and what his grandfather had, and continue this family legacy. But remember when I said about the planters in the back garden, I said make note of that because it's going to come into fruition. There's an idea there, and there's the reason why I'm pointing them out. Well, basically I had this idea and I just thought this was really funny. So the mum found out about this whole entire thing of, you know, get married, get this house, probably found out about all the different people that maybe came before her, because like I said, I imagine he was a bit of a Don Lothario, and also maybe still is a little bit. They could be a sim that maybe likes to go about the town, if you know what I mean. Maybe the husband isn't as faithful as what he should be. And so the mum found out about this, and I decided that it might be really fun for storyline purposes if in her garden she is growing poisonous stuff to purposely poison him. Now, if you're familiar with the Sims 4 Outdoor Retreat game pack, you might be aware that there is a number of different harvestables that you can find in the world of Granite Falls that are supposedly meant to be poisonous. There is toxic chamomile as well as like normal chamomile. There is poisonous fire leaf and normal fire leaf. there is some sort of weird mushroom, and then there's a false version of it. There is loads of different berries that your Sims are supposedly meant to find poisonous or toxic. Now, unfortunately, your Sims won't actually find these different harvestables to be poisonous or toxic. I really wish they would have, because then it would have introduced a new death type into the game. And well, I say no, it came with the Outdoor Retreat game pack, and that came out, what, like nine and a half years ago or something? Which, by the way, actually, the Sims 4 turned 10 this week. The Sims team didn't celebrate it, but yeah, The Sims 4 is officially 10 years old, or 10 years and a few days. But The Sims 4 is a 10-year-old game, which I cannot believe. Besides the point. Anyway, with the Outdoor Retreat game pack, yeah, missed opportunity. They definitely should have made it so your Sims could die from ingesting all these different harvestables. Maybe they can, and maybe I've missed something, but I don't think I've ever encountered that. But in my head, I love this idea of, the City Living expansion pack. Well, there's this one recipe that came from that DLC, which is called the pufferfish nigiri, I believe is how you say its name. I've always just referred to it as the pufferfish dish, but basically there's this dish that we got from a City Living expansion pack, and if your Sims are served a bad quality version of this recipe, they die. Like, they die from this recipe. And so me, in my head, I'm thinking, well, what about if this mum, she's got this herb garden, looks like a sweet little innocent, herb garden, growing all of her basil and all of her different mint and her herbs and all of her different stuff. Also did pop a few different flowers down under there as well. But I was thinking, well, what about if she's growing this little herb garden, secretly she's actually growing poison, and one day she's going to make her husband this pufferfish recipe, and she is going to basically making Poppy's clogs. Which, that's optional. You don't have to do that when my save file comes out, but it's an idea. I thought it would be fun for the gameplay purposes, but yeah, that was the idea that I had for the Sims that are going to be living in this house, my save file. I am so in love and just so obsessed with this idea for gameplay. I'm so sorry that I spoke over so much of the inside furnishing, but I tried to point out things when I was doing them, like when I was placing down the medals into the lounge room, when I was placing down the little stove oven top situation. But I really hope you guys don't mind, but I've just been so excited to talk about it and to share it with you, and so yeah, I really hope you like this idea as well. But either way, moving over, as you can see, I've now moved on downstairs into the second basement. So this is the proper secret basement, like hidden deep underground. And this is the one that I tried to make into some sort of safe room. Now, as we both now know, the dad of his household isn't exactly the nicest bloke around. He's not exactly going to be lending a helping hand if you're moving house, or he's not going to be the friendliest neighbour to the Roswells or something. But I was thinking, where he's in the military career and he is so high up, just about to be almost like the top dog, if you want to put it that way, but like the top of the career. I was thinking that it might be nice for him to have some sort of safe bunker, because where he's quite a mean Sim, I imagine that his line of work probably lines up with his traits, and maybe the military are doing something in the world of StrangerVille. Maybe it has something to do with the StrangerVille mystery. I'm not going to talk about it. I know the StrangerVille game pack came out forever and a decade ago, but I don't want to spoil it for you. There is so many new people that get The Sims 4 every single day, and so many people experience DLCs the first time. And I don't think I've ever spoken about the StrangerVille mystery and what actually happens in the gameplay, because I would feel so dreadful if I spoiled it for you. But maybe he has got something to do with it. And so with that, I was thinking, well, it might be quite nice if in this house, hidden deep underneath in the basement, there is, like a nice little safe room. In that room, I don't know if you would have seen, but I did try and make some reference to the different Sims, or at least the kids of his household, because I placed down 2 bunk beds, and there is 2 beds in each bunk bed, so there is 4. There's enough for all the different household members, even though I can imagine that the mum, if anything was to hit the fan and they had to go down there, would probably not want her husband to go with him. But there is 4, and on 2 of the bunk beds I placed down some army kind of military kind of posters to kind of symbolise the boys' bunk bed, and then on the daughter's one I placed down some cute little posters, and then I placed down what is meant to be some sort of teddy bear to make it a little bit more cutesy. But either way, moving over, as you can see, I've now moved on to the upstairs level of this house, which is technically on paper the 4th level, because there is 2 levels to the basement, and then we also have the ground floor. But I've now moved over to the upstairs level and quickly just did the upstairs hallway. Now, you might have noticed I placed down a painting and it had a random Sim in it. That's my playtesting Sim. that is a sim that I get to run around in every single one of my houses. Literally use the same one every single time. But that is a sim that is the playtester. And she playtests every single house. But the painting that I placed down, it is basically this frame that we got from the Sims 4 base game. And when you plonk it down onto a wall, it will automatically generate the household picture onto that photo. I don't think I've ever used that before in a build in the past, just because, I don't know, it seems a bit weird me placing down a photo of literally just my playtesting sim. But if you were to download this house, I'm assuming that it will probably delete that photo, and then whatever household that you have living in this house should be able to replace it with their default household photo. I know that off memory, you're meant to be able to lock the photo. So say for example, the previous generation that lived in this family's generation house, you could have probably locked a photo of them and it should have stayed. But yeah, if you're wondering, it wasn't a random sim photo, it was literally just my playtesting sim, which actually, good point to bring up. I've playtested this whole entire build and I didn't run into a single problem. So if you do want to download this build, yeah, you shouldn't run into any problems. But if you're curious as well, I did get her to have a kid, because I know that I'm now decorating the little girl's bedroom, and obviously there is kid-related activities in here every single week. Honestly, bless her, she's got about 10 children running around in all different worlds, because every single week when I get her to playtest my houses, I never keep the same kids, because when I'm taking screenshots and stuff, they're running about, they're doing whatnot, and it gives me a headache. And so normally what I do is I get her to have a kid quickly. I just create one in CAS, I don't actually go through the whole boohoo situation, but I get her to have a kid quickly, get the kid to playtest it, get him to go outside the house, cheat it, remove it from the family. She's got so many children just walking around in random worlds. But yeah, I did also get her to have a child, and the child has playtested the kids' room as well. But in the kids' room, hopefully you saw the idea that I was going for that little girl loves horses. And so in her bedroom, I placed down a few different horsey bits and bobs. I say horsey bits and bobs, there was only so much I can do, because with the Sims 4 Horse Ranch expansion pack, honestly, missed opportunity. They had such a big window to make kids in the game obsessed with horses. Because like I said, growing up, I've never been a horsey person. They're pretty, scare me a little bit. I've never rode a horse. I've rode a donkey, but they kind of scare me, horses, not gonna lie to you. But growing up, I had so many people that I was friends with that loved horses, and I felt like it was such a missed opportunity to maybe create a teddy bear that looked like a horse or something. But in the Sims 4 base game, we have got a horse toy, and so I placed that down into there. I placed down a photo frame that looks like it's got a horse in it. Also placed down some purposely horse ranch decorations, and so the bed is from horse ranch, it's got little sheeps on it. The rug is from horse ranch, it's also got some more sheeps on it. And then I placed down what is meant to be some sort of horse stables or some sort of farmhouse as the doll's house in that room. But either way, moving over, as you can see, I've now come in and actually finishing up one of the bathrooms in this house. Now I placed down a fireplace in the bathroom, which I know might seem a bit weird, but I feel like in Victorian houses you might be able to find that kind of thing. The one that I've used is from the Horse Ranch expansion pack, and I used it in a work swatch, but I just liked it in the bathroom, the way that the bathtub was in front of the windows, and we had this little bath shelf as well, and then the kitchen counters that I placed down in the bathroom as some sort of vanity and stuff. I just really liked it. And then also actually, I placed down an archway in the bathroom that led into the shower, because showers in The Sims 4, they're actually quite ugly, and so I really struggle when it comes around to placing them down into bathrooms. But yeah, no, I made a little archway section, and then your Sims will walk through. They've still got all the things that they need to wash themselves, but it looks a little bit more prim and proper. But something that I kind of needed to remind myself to talk about, and I said it at the very start of the video, and I said I'd talk about it shortly, and we're 47 minutes in now, and I completely have forgotten to mention it because I was just so, to be honest, obsessed with this build and obsessed with this house and the storyline and just everything about it. But it's also something that I didn't really want to talk about because it's not exactly the most fun in games. But basically, to cut a very long story short, if you're wondering what I was referencing at the very start of this video, and also if you just so happen to see my community post that I posted last week, I have had a bit of an issue recently with my computer. I'm going to keep this short because I do actually want to talk about this room, but I have just had so many different blue screens recently. I found out that it was something to do with my CPU and the BIOS. I kind of knew that already, but Intel they were taking their time with coming out with an update, but I have got an update now. It seems to be working okay. I say that, when I was doing this build, I was actually still running into some problems, and you might have noticed in the kitchen, I had to keep on cutting because there was, my game kept on going, not responding. It's like, what do you mean not responding? You should be responding, I need to do something here, but I think it's okay now. But if you were just curious about what I was referencing at the very start of this video, my computer was basically unusable last week. I was just having blue screen after blue screen, but thankfully now it seems to be okay. touch wood. If you heard that, I was touching my desk just in case, you know, never know. But either way, moving over, as you can see, I have now moved over and I've started decorating the teenager's bedroom. So in here, this is the bedroom for the teenage son that is basically so fascinated by his dad. I imagine that this teenage boy wants to grow up one day and just be exactly like his dad, which isn't a good thing. Normally I'd say that when it's a good thing, but this teenage boy is a bit of nasty work. I placed down this poster in here, which the one that I've used, I think it's from either City Living or the StrangerVille DLC. I'll put a little bit of text on screen to correct myself, whichever one it is. But it looks to be some sort of globe with some sort of like axe or whatever it's called through it. It's what the Grim Reaper holds. Now, I don't actually know the official name of it, but you know sometimes when your Sims pass away, Grim Reaper will come and then he'll wave this thing, and basically once he waves it, your Sim goes into an urn. And to me, that poster, it doesn't look like it's giving off the friendliest energy, and so I'm thinking, perfect for this teenager. But also in this room, I placed down these little frame prints. The ones that I've used are from the Grow and Together DLC, but I moved objects, some military awards that your Sims will receive in that career, and basically put them on the inside of it. I just really like the idea of this boy just being so fascinated by his dad, by his granddad, by his whole entire family legacy, and maybe one day his dad gifted them to him as kind of like a Winterfest present. Sister gets a horse, he gets some medals. But I imagine he was just as happy, to be fair, as his sister when she got the horse. But yeah, in that room as well, I ended up placing down a dining room table as a computer desk, just because I couldn't find a nice computer desk. And then there also ends up being a few different bookcases as well as a wardrobe. But now moving over, I've now moved on into the last room in this house, which is the parents' bedroom. So in here, this bedroom is actually quite big, and I was really struggling on almost figuring out how I was going to fill it out in a way. And so you'll notice in this bedroom there ends up being a fireplace as well as almost like a little walk-in wardrobe situation. In the walk-in wardrobe, I placed down one of the ones that we got from the Get Together expansion pack. I also placed down an armchair. It looks like it's blocking it, I promise you it's not. The Get Together wardrobe, if you place down something on the left hand side of it, your Sims can still go in and out of it. But if you place something down on the right hand side of it, that makes it unusable, because when your Sims walking through that wardrobe, they walk into the right hand door, if you're following along with me. But in this room as well, I decided to go for the cats and dogs bed, and you'll see shortly, to kind of reference the dad of this household not really being at home that much and always going away for work and travelling for work, I placed down a suitcase on his side of the bed. And then you'll see as well, I placed down one of them awards that your Sims will gain if they're in the military career. By the way, I didn't mention it, but I imagine that this guy, he's always in his military uniform. You know how like your Sims have their everyday outfits, their formal outfits, their hot weather outfits? With this Sim, literally just military uniform. I imagine that you can always find him suited and booted, and he's always proudly displaying all the different medals that maybe him and his dad and granddad have maybe earned. But in this room, I'm basically going to go around, finish it off, and that is pretty much it. So anyway guys, I'm going to end this voiceover right here. As always, you can download this build via the gallery. My gallery ID is JessicapieYT, or you can search for the hashtag JessicapieYT or just the hashtag Jessicapie. As always, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and as always, if you do like my content then please subscribe, and hopefully I will see you in my next Sims 4 speedrunning video. Bye guys.